According to the inhabitants of the Dark Aether, their realm has existed since time began, and since then they have been in a constant state of war with one another, forming tribes, clans, and royal bloodlines that would last for millions of years. In all honesty, the Vanguard zombie story itself isn't as important as the world building that the game has provided to the Dark Aether. It is important to bring to attention here that this constant state of unrest in the Dark Aether was happening all throughout the events of the Aether's storyline, many thousands of cycles, and even more significantly, the entities within the Dark Aether were unaware that there was even ever another realm outside of their own. These warring clans of the Dark Aether came in many different shapes and sizes, all with their own desires and agendas, but in the most ancient days of the Dark Aether, they were united by one thing: their worship of the Construct. The Construct is a giant monolith that hovers above the Dark Aether, believed to even predate time itself. Whilst it appears to be made of stone, it is a sentient being and is all-powerful. The Construct had no care for the entities worshipping it, however it was constantly watching, with some even believing it to be judging life's worthiness to keep existing. On very rare occasions, however, after an individual completed a series of arduous trials, the Construct would imbue them with a small portion of its infinite power, at which point that individual would become the Archon. Throughout the history of the Dark Aether, there have been at least 4 Archons, though there have possibly been more. The first Archon used his power to eradicate a parasitic species that was plaguing the Dark Aether. The 4th Archon shattered the moon into pieces and weaponized those shards which still hang above the Dark Aether. The origins of the Construct are unclear, but with it being there since the Dark Aether itself, it is a wonder if the first Archon could have been Dr. Monty. At the very least, Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man were probably aware of the Construct's existence. As millennia passed, one clan rose to prominence in the Dark Aether and eventually were considered its lords. They had yet to control the entire realm, but one particularly ambitious son of this bloodline would seek to change that. His name was Cortifex the Deathless. Through guile and deception, Cortifex's plans eventually culminated in the murder of his parents and his official ascension to Lord of the Dark Aether. He also took a wife, Sarakix, that was adamant on not wanting a child. Dark Aether entities do not die of old age, and so having a child to further his line was not a requirement and was seen by him as a threat, as the child could do to him what he did to his own parents. At some point following this, Cortifex became obsessed with the Construct, seeing it as the ultimate way to dominate the Dark Aether. He was able to successfully pass the trials, but upon appealing to the living monolith, it refused him for reasons unknown. Cortifex flew into such a rage over this that he would dispatch his 5 personal assassins, the Sisters of Agony, to remove anyone else who would try and petition the Construct. Eventually, Syraxis became impregnated with his child, and in rage, Cortifex set out to punish both her and the child. He transformed Sarakix into a shadow of her former self, erasing her memories and changing her physical form to that of the newest Sister of Agony. He then performed an unspeakable act of cruelty on the child, which we don't have confirmation on exactly what he did. At some point, mysterious objects of great power appeared in the Dark Aether without warning. These were the many creatures and artifacts that were banished to this realm by Primus Nikolai at the end of Tag der Toten, such as the Ray Gun, the Pack-a-Punch Machine, and the Mystery Box. This was of course when the prior multiverse collapsed into the Dark Aether, leaving only but one singular linear timeline universe. With all of the entities, items, and beings of the Aether being sent in there, this was an eye-opening event for the denizens of the Dark Aether, as they had believed their reality was the only one. Now aware of other beings, they attempted to gaze beyond the dimensional veil, but after locating Earth, all they found were little more than cavemen, clearly far too primitive to have designed objects like the Pack-a-Punch Machine. Regardless, some entities took interest in the newly discovered humans and began to interact with the various emerging civilizations, though they were rather limited in what they were able to do. Syraxis, for example, appearing in fire and crystal balls, but unable to do much else. After some discussion, Syraxis the Shadow and Belikar the Warlock devised a way for them to cross over into the other dimension, through objects they called artifacts. They would craft an item that would appeal to a given human culture, bind their own essence to it, and cast it through the dimensional veil. Once picked up by a human, they could bond to them, allowing the human to use some of their power. Syraxis created a dragon with the intent on being sent to the Japanese. They went on to believe her to be a kitsune, a mischievous fox spirit. Belikar created a mask for the Maya in South America. Invictor the Destroyer, a legendary soldier of the Dark Aether, crafted a short sword to be used by the heroes of Greece, who initially viewed him as the god of war, Ares. After bonding with the Greek hero, Achilles, and helping him in the siege of Troy, their two legends became inseparable, and Invictor would later be believed to be the spirit of Achilles himself. Not Nauticus the Conqueror, commander of Cortifex's Night Legions, created a Warhorn, which was received by the Norsemen, who believed him to be the Emir, the father of the Frost Giants. Cortifex, however, put very little thought into his artifact, simply putting 2 pyramids onto a stick, and sent it to ancient Egypt, where it was received by the pharaohs themselves. All of these entities would have an influential impact on these world's cultures, being seen as gods and demons over the many years, shaping religion, myths, and legends. Cortifex's expansionism culminated in the Nether Wars, his final attempt to attain total control of the Dark Aether. With Nauticus in command of his forces, he set about destroying any resistance in his path. Be'lakor the Warlock, chief among a clan of scholars and historians, was among the first to resist Cortifex. Similarly, Syraxis, despite having no memory of a previous life, believed she could not continue a service to Cortifex and fled the sisters. Now she also opposed him. As Cortifex approached the vast wilds of the Dark Aether, he commanded the nature-worshipping clan who lived within to submit to him. After refusing, Cortifex had his Sisters of Agony, now with one less member, to kill all who dwelled within, whilst his Night Legions burned the forest to the ground. This, however, was an oversight by the Deathless, as, unbeknownst to him, this clan had the ability known as the Web of Life. When one member died, their life force and power was redistributed to the rest of the clan. Unfortunately for Cortifex, one single member survived, Vanguard, and she was now effectively immortal. Sometime following this, at the Battle of Obsidian Ridge, Invictor the Destroyer, legendary soldier, fled the battlefield, eventually finding his way to Be'lakor's resistance. Cortifex, seeing Syraxis was still meddling in affairs on Earth, whilst equally being a thorn in his side, set about dealing with his former wife once and for all. He crafted a new kind of artifact, a bronze mirror, and cast it through the dimensional veil to a small swampy island in Okinawa, on the Japanese archipelago. This island was where Syraxis had first crossed over from the Dark Aether to the human world, and she often had her host come back to visit. At the time, around the Edo period, Syraxis was in possession of the Lord of the Island. Cortifex contacted the priesthood of the island under the guise of a friendly spirit and informed them that their lord was being possessed by a demon, but they could use the mirror to free him. The priest did just this, and after forcing Syraxis back into her artifact, buried it on the island. Be'lakor and Vanguard eventually met at the site on the latter's birth, in the corrupted lands that now stood where the wilds once were. They masterminded the plot to defeat Cortifex, involving forcing him into his artifact and trapping him on Earth. Following this, and having seen the power that the opposition now held, Nauticus the Conqueror saw that Cortifex had no hope of winning and fled to the resistance himself. Now alone, the resistance closed in on Cortifex and banished him to our reality. However, in the process, they ended up doing the same to themselves. We have no exact date for this, but it was seemingly sometime prior to World War I and after the Edo period in Japan.